Hi, my name is Jason, and this is the Historical Cinematic Universe. The Great Migration South is a 2014 historical drama series set during a period known as the Huang Chao Rebellion, which took place from 874 to 884. Vardy vs. Rooney, a courtroom drama, is a 2022 two-part series from the United Kingdom about a defamation case between two wives of English footballers that took place earlier that year. Now, these may seem like two completely random and unrelated stories, with absolutely nothing in common, but they are more connected than you would think. At the time of this video, they are chronologically the first and last stories in the greater historical cinematic universe. My list of over 3,800 movies and shows based on true stories, connected through characters based on real people. And so, despite being separated by over 1,000 years, they are connected, and here's how. Also, a side note, apologies in advance for mispronouncing several of these names. Huang Chao was a salt trader who rebelled against the Tang dynasty and declared himself emperor of his own kingdom, reigning from 881 to 884. His rebellion was the backdrop of the Great Migration South, and naturally appears in the show. We also see him briefly in The Heroic Ones, a 1970 Hong Kong martial arts film about 13 generals who fought against Huang Chao before turning on each other. Li Kunzu was a prince of Jin and the founding emperor of the later Tang dynasty, ruling from 923 to 926. He appears in The Heroic Ones as one of the generals, and we see the final moments of his reign in the beginning of the Great Emperor and Song dynasty, the 2015 Chinese historical drama about the life and reign of the founding emperor of the Song dynasty, Zhao Kuan-yin. Zhao Kuan-yi was the second emperor of the Song dynasty from 976 to 997. His early years are depicted in the Great Emperor in Song dynasty, while his later years are depicted in the beginning of 2021's Palace of Devotion, a historical romance from China about Empress Liu, Empress Consort and later Empress Regent of Song. Zhao Zhen was the fourth emperor of Song, reigning from 1022 to 1063. His 41-year reign was the longest in the Song dynasty. We see him in his youth in Palace of Devotion. An older Zhao Zhen, later in his reign, appears in Su Dongpo, a series from 2012 about Su Shi, who was one of the most important figures in the Song dynasty. Kai Jing was a Song politician who was first depicted in Su Dongpo, and again in 2013's The Patriot Yue Fei, about the life of Yue Fei, considered to be one of the greatest generals of the Song dynasty, who fought against the Jin dynasty in the 12th century. Wan Yandan was the third emperor of the Great Jin dynasty, from 1135 to 1150. His ascension to the throne is shown in The Patriot Yue Fei, and in 2004 he was featured in the prologue to the Chinese series Genghis Khan, which was based on the life of, well, Genghis Khan is, of course, one of the most well-known figures in history, being the founder of the Mongol Empire, ruling from 1206 to 1227. Naturally, he was featured in the 2004 series, which was just one of the many shows that featured him. Another show was the Egyptian series Al-Frazan from 1994, which dealt with the Mongol Empire's invasion of the Middle East. Louis IX was the King of France from 1226 to 1270, and is the only French king to be declared a saint. He also led the 7th and 8th Crusades, and his campaigns into the Middle East were depicted in Al-Frazan. He was also the subject of a TV film from France called Saint Louis or the Beneficent Royalty from 1982. Blanche of Castile was the Queen of France and acted as regent to her son Louis IX when he was still a child. She was also featured in Saint Louis or the Beneficent Royalty. Blanche was also a character in William Shakespeare's play The Life and Death of King John, where she is betrothed to the future King Louis VIII of France, and naturally appears in the 1984 BBC adaptation. Henry III was the King of England from 1207 to 1272. Being the son of King John, he was also a character in The Life and Death of King John, and appears in the 1984 BBC adaptation, where we see him becoming king at the end. In the 9th episode of the BBC historical anthology series, Churchill's People, we see an older King Henry dealing with an event known as the Second Barons' War. Edward I, also known as Edward Longshanks, was King of England from 1272 to 1307. We see a young Prince Edward in the same episode of Churchill's People supporting his father. Edward is probably most known for his involvement with the First War of Scottish Independence, and this was depicted in the 1995 movie Braveheart, where he was played by acclaimed actor Patrick McGoohan. Edward II was the King of England from 1307 until he was deposed in 1327. In his youth, he joined his father's campaigns in Scotland, and so he was also depicted in Braveheart. Edward was also the subject of the Elizabethan play Edward II by Christopher Marlowe, a contemporary of William Shakespeare. In 1970, the BBC aired an adaptation of the play with Sir Ian McKellen in the title role. Edward III became King of England in 1327 when his mother, Isabella of France, deposed his father, Edward II, and reigned for 50 years until his death in 1377. A young Edward is shown ascending to the throne in the adaptation of Edward II. An older Edward III appears in the 1955 film The Dark Avenger, entrusting his son and heir to defend the English region of Aquitaine from the French. Edward the Black Prince was the eldest son and heir apparent of Edward III, though he died before his father. The Dark Avenger follows the adventures of Edward the Black Prince, and he is played by Golden Age actor Errol Flynn. In the late 1360s, he led a campaign into Spain, and this was featured in the Spanish series Peter I the Cruel from 1989 about King Peter of Castile. John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, was Edward III's fourth son. While he never became king himself, many of his descendants would. In fact, every English monarch after Henry IV is descended from him. He is also featured in Peter I the Cruel. John of Gaunt was a prominent character in William Shakespeare's Richard II. In 2012 and 2016, the BBC aired a series of feature-length adaptations of Shakespeare's history plays known as the Henriade. The series was called The Hollow Crown, and in its 2012 adaptation of Richard II, John of Gaunt was masterfully played by Sir Patrick Stewart in a very engaging performance. Edward, the second Duke of York, was an English nobleman who held significant appointments during the reigns of Richard II, Henry IV, and Henry V. He was a character in two Shakespearean plays. The first was Richard II when he was the Duke of Aumerle, and the second in Henry V as the Duke of York. Naturally, he was featured in the Hollow Crown adaptations of both plays. Henry VI was the King of England from 1422 to 1461, and again from 1470 to 1471. It was during his reign when the infamous War of the Roses broke out. We see him as an infant at the end of the Hollow Crown's Henry V. We see an older Henry VI in The White Queen, the 2013 British series focusing on the women involved in the War of the Roses. Henry VII was the King of England from 1485 to 1509 and was the founder of the Tudor dynasty. We see his rise to the throne of England in The White Queen, and we see him on his deathbed in Henry VIII, the 2003 British two-part series about the life and reign of Henry VIII. Elizabeth I was the Queen of England from 1558 to 1603. She was the last and longest reigning Tudor monarch. As the second daughter of Henry VIII, she naturally appears in the 2003 series. Being one of the most well-known English monarchs in history, there have been several movies and shows based on her life and reign. One of them was Elizabeth I, a two-part British-American series from 2005 with Dame Helen Mirren playing Queen Elizabeth I. Francois, Duke of Anjou, was the youngest son of King Henry II of France and Catherine de' Medici. Despite being 22 years her junior, Francois courted Queen Elizabeth and was her only foreign suitor to court her in person. The two became close, with Elizabeth calling him her frog. This courtship was depicted in 2005's Elizabeth I. He was also featured in the 2010 film Henry IV, about the rise of Henry IV of France, the first King of France from the House of Bourbon. Louis XIII was the King of France from 1610 to 1643. We see him as a young boy in Henry IV, and on his deathbed during a flashback in the second episode of Versailles, the 2015 French historical drama about the reign of the Sun King Louis XIV of France, and the construction of the Palace of Versailles. Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, was a French prince who served as regent of the Kingdom of France from 1715 to 1723. We see him as an infant in the third season of Versailles. We see an older Philippe in the 2021 French series The Adventures of Young Voltaire, about the famed writer and philosopher Voltaire in his youth. Voltaire was an 18th century French Enlightenment writer and philosopher, and was one of the most influential writers in history. Naturally, a young Voltaire appears in The Adventures of Young Voltaire. An old Voltaire appears in the beginning of the 1948 French biopic The Lame Devil, about the infamous French statesman and diplomat Talleyrand. Henry John Temple, also known as Lord Palmerston, was a British politician who served as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1855 to 1858, and again from 1859 to 1865. His time as Foreign Secretary, from earlier in his career, was depicted in The Lame Devil, and his time as Prime Minister was depicted in Edward VII, the 1975 British historical drama series about the life and eventual reign of King Edward VII of the United Kingdom. George VI was the King of the United Kingdom from 1936 to 1952, who oversaw the British Empire during World War II. We see him as a young boy in Edward VII, the show about his grandfather, and we see his final years in The Crown, the Netflix series about his daughter, Queen Elizabeth II. Tony Blair is a British politician who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2007. The final two seasons of The Crown depict his premiership. Tony Blair, as played by Michael Sheen, was depicted in the 2003 TV movie The Deal, about an alleged deal Blair made with fellow British politician Gordon Brown regarding who would lead the Labour Party in 1994. Gordon Brown served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 2007 to 2010. He, of course, also appears in The Deal, played by the governor himself, David Morrissey. The Deal could be viewed as the beginning of Labour's rise to power in the late 90s, while the 2015 British TV film Coalition depicts their fall, when the Labour Party lost the 2010 general election, and the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats formed a coalition government. Naturally, Gordon Brown appears in that film. Chris Huhne is a British politician who served as the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change under the coalition government. In Coalition, he is depicted taking part in the various negotiations between the three parties. He briefly appears in On Expenses, the 2010 British TV movie about the UK parliamentary expenses scandal that emerged in 2009. Hugh Tomlinson is a British barrister with a long and distinguished career with many cases under his belt. He took part in the litigation that sought full disclosure of parliamentary expenses, and this was depicted in On Expenses. In 2022, he represented media personality Rebecca Vardy in a libel case against another media personality, Colleen Rooney, which the tabloids dubbed the Wagatha Christie trial. Just 5 months after the trial was completed, the two-parter Vardy v. Rooney, a courtroom drama, aired, featuring a portrayal of Tomlinson. And there you have it, 30 stories, 29 individuals, and nearly 1,150 years of history. Now, there are plenty of stories set before the Great Migration South, and there are even a few stories set after Vardy versus Rooney. However, at the time of this video, they do not connect to the greater HCU. As soon as I find a story that does connect to these earlier or later stories, the list may change enough to the point where I have to make another video. If you want to see that future video, or any more videos about the historical cinematic universe, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like, and please comment below what movies or shows you would like to see me cover. Thank you and have a great day.